as I watched my wife, Amy, of 3 years having her glory hole reamed by an upper-crust snob named, believe it or not, Reginald, that she had dated before she married me. I was glad that I had done 2 smart things in the past. I needed to do something smart now, too. However, since I was devoid of a camera, my cell phone was being repaired. I had just seen Reginald bust his juice in her, and Amy and I had to be at her daddy's house for dinner in less than an hour. I knew that by the time that I got a camera, the photo op would be gone. Since Reginald's car was blocking Amy's, however, I could cause them some pain and get a small amount of revenge and still be smart. With gloves on for all my related endeavors, I quickly unscrewed the valves on 3 of his tires, deflated them, and then restored the valves. I got a rubber mallet out of the garage and waited behind a bush. Reginald came hurrying out of the house a few minutes later. As he swore and knelt by his right front tire, unseen I hit him on the head with the rubber mallet. I didn't hit him hard enough to kill him, but hard enough to put him out. I removed the car keys from Reginald's pocket and threw them as far into the woods next to our house as I could. Since I was a center fielder in high school and 2 years in college, the keys went far enough never to be found. I removed the credit cards, driver's license, and cash from his wallet. You would think that a rich snob would carry around more than $28 in cash, wouldn't you? Then I wiped off the small amount of hair, tissue, and blood on the mallet with a cloth soaked in bleach, returned the mallet to the garage, and put the cloth in a plastic bag. The credit cards and license joined the rag in the bag. With the plastic bag in hand, I ran to my car, which was several hundred yards away so that Reginald could not have seen it, and drove toward dear old daddy-in-law's house at a high rate of speed. One of the few operating pay phones left in America was at a 7-Eleven on my way. I parked at the next store over. I removed my suit jacket, put on a nondescript baseball cap and sweatshirt, and mirrored sunglasses, and then walked toward the phone. I gave a teenage girl strolling out of the store Reginald's $28 to call 911 and anonymously report a person laying on the driveway at 15 Ridgeway Terrace. I threw the plastic bag with the rag, credit cards, and license in it into the dumpster at the 7-Eleven. I then drove to Daddy Dearest's house, arriving 10 minutes early. As you can already tell, I didn't really like Daddy Dearest. He liked me, sort of, but only because I was the best producer at the big insurance firm that he owned. That is, he liked the money that I made him. Daddy Dearest, his name is Chester Grimes, was and is a rich pompous scumsucker who has always thought that Amy was too good to marry a guy from a middle-class family like Blake Bristol, yours truly. In reality, if one based it upon morality rather than money, I was too good for Amy and Chester. Chester valued promptness, so I called Amy on Chester's landline to find out why she wasn't there at the appointed time. She was harried and distraught when she answered the phone. "Hi, Amy. Where are you? Your dad is getting a little cross." "Oh, well, I'm sorry I'm late. There was a crime in front of our house and the police are here." "Yes, officer. This is my husband Blake." "No, you don't need to talk to him, do you?" I heard some arguing in the background and obviously Amy had placed her hand over the mouthpiece. I heard the noise of the phone changing hands, then. "This is Detective Burns. Is this Blake Bristol?" "Yes, it is, officer. What happened? Is my wife all right?" "Yes, Mr. Bristol, physically she's fine. However, a man named Reginald Swifton was attacked on your driveway and was taken away by ambulance and his car is just now being towed." "What the hell was Reginald Swifton doing at my house?" I screamed with indignation, loud enough to ensure that the ever-proper Chester Grimes was sure to hear. "Your wife has not really explained that to us. Perhaps you have some information about it?" "What the hell? He's an ex-boyfriend of hers. Maybe he just stopped by for a quickie. How the hell should I know? I hope that he got the shit kicked out of him, that a-hole." "No need to get vulgar, Mr. Bristol. Then you know nothing about why he might have been at your house or who attacked him?" "No, but when you find the guy, tell him I'd like to buy him a beer." "Can you take my wife to the hospital and get a vaginal swab to prove that Swifton's DNA is in her vagina?" "Not unless she's willing to go," Burns answered. "What if it was a sexual assault and she's too afraid to tell you? Can't you make her go under those circumstances?" I feverishly asked. "Unless she says she's been sexually assaulted." "I'm sorry, but I can't," Burns replied. "Will you at least take detailed photos of her to show whether there was an attack on her, such as bruising or bleeding?" I pleaded. "Yes, we can do that," Burns replied. "Thanks. Can you put the the potential crime victim, Amy, back on the phone, Detective Burns?" "Yes, although I'd like to talk to you some more tomorrow. By then I'll have my cell back. Call me then to set up an appointment, and I'll come to see you," I told him, and then gave him my cell phone number. "Hello, Blake, honey," Amy started to say. "Cut the crap, Amy. I want you to go to the hospital immediately. Have Detective Burns drive you to get a vaginal swab to see if Reginald assaulted you." No. Where did you get that idea, Blake?" "Well, then go to prove to me that you didn't have sex with him. How can you accuse me of cheating at a time like this?" Amy started to cry. "A time like what? So the a-hole got assaulted. I don't give a shit about him, and you shouldn't either," I yelled, and then paused for dramatic effect before I continued. "Let's put it this way, sweetheart. You either get a vaginal swab while the police witness it, before you clean yourself up, or I'm filing for divorce." "Screw you," she screamed, but before she could get anything else out, I hung up on her. Chester was ashen and pissed. "What was that?" he bellowed. "Well, Chet," I replied. He hated being called Chet. "Your daughter has cheated on me with that a-hole Reginald Swifton, so I'll be divorcing her." When Chester got over his shock, he stammered, "You can't talk to me or about my daughter like that. I should fire you." The phone rang. I knew that it was Amy, so I just lifted it up and then slammed it back down. "Will you put that in writing?" I excitedly asked, taking a pen and pad off of the kitchen counter and handing it to him. "Even though it will rip my heart out not to make money for a pompous scumsucker like you anymore, I'll somehow survive being terminated." Chester stammered some more, including mumbling about what a classless ingrate I was, and how he would be glad to get rid of me. As he wrote, "Blake Bristol is fired as of today," putting in the date and signing his name. "Thanks, shithead," I said, and then walked out the door cradling my pink slip, with the ringing phone providing background music. "Okay, I know that you're a little confused by my actions and think that I might be a nutcase, but maybe a little more information will help clear things up." The two smart things I referred to in the first paragraph were the conditions of the prenuptial agreement I had with Amy and the employment contract with Chester's company, signed at the same time as the prenup. I humbled both Amy and Chester into agreeing to adding one provision to each of those contracts. I made the prenup reciprocal, that is, if either of us physically harmed the other or had sex with anyone else during the marriage, then the penalties of the prenup would take effect. In my case, I'd get $500,000 from her trust fund before we split our other assets 50-50. In her case, she'd get 85% of the assets. If there were children, fortunately we had none when I saw Reginald porking her, the wrong party would get custody. I had never even touched Amy in anger, and had never cheated on her despite ample opportunity to. As far as the employment contract was concerned, if I was fired or demoted so that my earnings or responsibilities were reduced by 10% or more, then the non-compete provisions of my employment contract were voided. I was not in the strongest position to divorce Amy for infidelity and get my due under the prenup because I had no photos or recordings that constituted definitive proof. I had suspected her for a year, though, and had gathered a significant amount of admissible evidence. That is, I did have circumstantial proof of her cheating well before the Reginald incident. My middle-class background friend and attorney, Ron Botts, told me that the circumstantial evidence gave me a good shot if we got the right judge, and that we likely could gather some more useful information during discovery. Ron also counseled me on what to do and not to do with a divorce action imminent. I was advised to avoid closing accounts, switching money or securities, canceling credit cards, etc., until we got an order from the court accounting for and freezing assets. Acting precipitously would look bad to the judge and prejudice our case. As soon as I left Chester with steam coming out of his ears, I bought a burner cell phone and called Ron's office. "Why are you still there at 7 p.m. on a Friday night?" I asked. "Servicing helpless shits like you," he laughed back. "What's up?" I explained the situation to him, but only from the time that I got to Chester's house. Ron had straightforward advice. "Don't go back home tonight. Go to a hotel, get receipts, and be seen on their security cameras. Tomorrow morning, a video camera toting PI will accompany you back to your home and leave a recording device there. Meanwhile, I will check up on this Reginald thing. I'll initiate the divorce proceedings Monday." I did as instructed. The next morning, Saturday, the PI and I went to my house, the scene of the Reginald screw job. The PI went in the side door, and I went in the front door. I made noise and yelled out, "Amy, I'm here to get some things, then leave." Amy quickly came down the stairs. "Where the hell do you get off accusing me of cheating and making my dad fire you, you creep? Did you get the vaginal swab?" I sarcastically asked. "Hell no," she started screaming before I cut her off. "Then we have nothing to talk about. I'll get my clothes and leave." She was so concentrated on berating me that I'm sure that Amy didn't see the PI, but he got good photos and videos of her face and exposed skin, showing no cuts or bruises. I closed and locked the bedroom door and ignored her pounding and yelling as I packed my clothes and valuables into 2 suitcases. I checked the sheets for spots, but she was smart enough to have changed them. She probably burned them or soaked them in bleach. Once packed, without a word, I walked right past her and out the front door. The PI filmed her with a telephoto lens from the car as she screamed on the outside stoop as I left. He had placed a long battery-life voice-activated recorder in the kitchen when Amy and I were upstairs. How'd the photos and video come out? I asked as we drove away. Perfectly. It's easy to see that she had no marks on her. The placing of the voice-activated recorder turned out to be a touch of genius. Later that day, we caught her conversation with one of her friends, Lila Castle. Amy got Lila to punch her in the face and arms and put small cuts on her arms and neck. After Lila did what Amy asked, they both went to a clinic to have the cuts and bruises documented and took photos. While Amy and Lila were at the clinic, the PI and I went back to my house to remove any other stuff I needed and to pick up the recorder. Ron had called it perfectly. We sued for adultery on Monday. By the end of the week, Amy had countersued for physical abuse. About the time that the divorce papers were being served on Amy on Monday, after I had cleaned out my office and retrieved my cell phone from the repair shop, I went to see Detective Burns. "Where were you when this Reginald Swifton thing went down, Mr. Bristol?" was his first question after an exchange of pleasantries. "It sounds like you're treating me as a suspect," I said, with crossed arms. "Well, we do have evidence linking you to the scene," he continued. "Well, then you should arrest me, because I'm done talking to you and want my attorney," I said forcefully. Of course I knew that he had no evidence. "Is that really the way you want to play it?" "You'll look guilty," Burns continued. "I thought that when I asked for an attorney you couldn't ask me another question, and you just did. Either arrest me or I'm leaving," I said. I got up and started to walk out the door. "We'll be in touch," Burns continued, without bluster. "Only with my attorney," I said, handing him one of Ron's cards, then exiting. I never heard from him again, nor did Ron. I really wish that at the time that the suit and the countersuit were filed that I had been aware of a conversation that Ron had with another PI, Dan Drake, who was also a friend of Ron's. My angst would have been significantly relieved, and I would have understood Ron's staunch confidence in our case. The conversation between Ron and Dan took place 2 days after the countersuit was filed. Ron related it to me only after the trial. "Dan, I don't want you to tell me any substance whatsoever of what you know, but I need answers to a question or two." "Shoot, Ron, if I can help I will," Dan replied. "Dan, does the name Amy Bristol mean anything to you?" "Yes, it does." "Do you have any clients you have worked for interested in Amy Bristol's activities?" "Yes, I do, Ron." "Can you give me their names?" "I will check with them and get back to you, Ron." Dan called Ron a few hours later. "Their names are Elizabeth Moore and Jamie Watkins, and—" "Don't tell me anything more, Dan. Will either client want you to monitor a divorce trial where Amy Bristol is a party?" "Okay, Ron." "Yes, I'm sure that at least one of them will. I'll let you know the date, Dan." "Thanks," Ron signed off. While that conversation was taking place, apparently I was interviewing with Chester's biggest competitor, who hired me on the spot with the same salary as I was paid by Chester's company and with a commission almost twice as large. Since I had no non-compete with Chester's company, I contacted all of my old clients within a week, and within a month almost 90% had transferred their business to my new company. I could afford Ron's and the PI's bills. Also, between the start of the divorce proceedings and the trial date, more than 80% of the time, I beat Chester's company for new business when we went head-to-head. Ron had filed for a freeze of assets when he filed the divorce petition. It was granted. Neither Amy nor I was able to touch our money except for attorney fees and other litigation costs, the allowance provided by the court, or as a result of a special request that the other party either agreed to or the court ordered. There was no cashing of CDs, canceling of credit cards, shifting of money from joint accounts to solo ones, selling of stocks, canceling insurance policies, or raiding of safe deposit boxes. The judge assignment appeared bad, but Ron assured me that it would ultimately work to our advantage. Judge Matt Moore was presiding. He was the newest and youngest judge in family court, very vibrant, self-assured, and good-looking, with a suspected prejudice against us. I had only met Matt Moore once, at a 4th of July party at his next-door neighbor's house about a month before he was confirmed as a judge. I remember because Amy and I fought that night because she got drunk and disappeared on me. Moore spoke very highly of my father-in-law, Chester Grimes, in the brief conversation that Moore and I had that night. I asked Ron, why did we waive a jury trial when you suspect, because of his relationship with Chester Grimes, that Moore is prejudiced against us? Ron just smiled. Who's the attorney, you or me? Don't get your panties in a bunch. I know what I'm doing. I want to get you more than the prenup calls for, he very confidently replied. Ron explained the pretrial procedure to me. During discovery, we would have to disclose what we knew and would use as evidence. The only exception was that if something would be used only for impeachment, that is challenging the credibility of a witness or party, then we did not have to disclose the evidence or any witness who would be presenting it. Ron didn't tell me about his conversation with Dan Drake, nor did he really have any discoverable information based on that discussion, so it was not disclosed to Amy's attorney, Amanda McAfee, during discovery. When we received the interrogatory responses from Amy's attorney, sworn to by Amy under oath, unsurprisingly, Lila Castle was identified as a witness to my alleged assault on Amy. The assault was alleged to have taken place on the Saturday after the Reginald incident when the discreet PI and I went to my house to collect my things. Ron immediately noticed Lila's deposition before we had to respond to Amy's discovery requests. Lila's videotaped deposition, which Amy and I both attended though we never spoke to each other, was on a Monday. After Ron pinned Lila down on the date of the alleged attack, he struck. So, Ms. Castle, you're absolutely positive that you witnessed the attack shortly before you accompanied Mrs. Bristol to the clinic for treatment on that Saturday, correct? Yes, I'm positive, she said, trying to look confident, but not pulling it off. You, yourself, did not inflict the wounds on Mrs. Bristol, correct? Ron continued. Lila's and Amy's jaws dropped, and Amanda McAfee looked perplexed. Of course not, Lila hesitantly replied. I'm going to play an audio tape for you that an independent witness will swear was recorded that Saturday after Mr. Bristol left his house. Tell me if you recognize the voices. As Ron played the tape, all of the faces on the other side of the table became ashen. When it was done, Ron asked, do you recognize the voices? Aren't you and Mrs. Bristol talking about how to bruise her and then lie that Mr. Bristol did it? You must have faked that, Lila sobbed. We'll have a voice expert compare your voice and your testimony today with that on the tape, and then send the matter to the DA for perjury prosecution. That's all the questions I have. Not surprisingly, Amy's attorney had no cross. 2 days after Lila's deposition, Amanda McAfee moved to withdraw the countersuit and asked the court to issue an order of reconciliation to stay the case for 2 months while the parties sought the services of a certified reconciliation mediator. Ron vigorously opposed the motion. During oral argument, he said, Your Honor, they filed the countersuit in bad faith, and we want a chance to put that on the record during the trial since it affects Mrs. Bristol's credibility. Also, my client doesn't have the slightest interest in reconciliation, and while the case is stayed, he's losing interest on the $500,000 he's going to collect from Mrs. Bristol. Showing his prejudice, Judge Moore granted Amy's motion but did throw us a bone. If reconciliation does not work out and Mr. Bristol prevails at trial, then Mrs. Bristol will pay 2 months' interest at 4% per annum on any money Mr. Bristol is entitled to aside from the division of assets. Ron cautioned me to follow the instructions in the order during the reconciliation procedures so as not to give the court a reason to sanction me. He told me not to swear, no matter how tempted. Is the word SLUT a swear word? I asked him. No, but don't use it. Call her a grossly unfaithful spouse, Ron replied, with a smile. Not surprisingly, 2 days before the ordered mediation session, I got a letter from Chester Grimes. I had refused to answer his phone calls or even to listen to his messages. The letter was very conciliatory and offered me my old job back at twice the salary and commission. I saved it in case Ron could use it as evidence, but never responded to it. No attorneys were allowed at the mediation, just the parties. Amy arrived at the mediation session dressed to kill. She is a sexy, sensuous woman, and her wardrobe, makeup, and hairstyle were impeccable. If I didn't hate her, I would have loved to bend her over the mediator's couch and screw the shit out of her. Since the order said nothing about dress, I came in cut-off jeans, sandals, and an old college t-shirt riddled with holes. Amy hated that shirt and had tried to throw it away twice. I also hadn't shaved in 2 days, and my hair was uncombed and unwashed. Amy took one look at me and knew that it was over, but she tried anyway, undoubtedly motivated only by the $500,000. Mr. Bristol, I'm surprised by your appearance, the mediator said. The order said nothing about dress, and this is how it chose to appear. I'm sorry if it doesn't meet your approval, I replied, trying to avoid a sarcastic tone, but probably not succeeding. The mediator then went over the procedure, while Amy and I remained silent. Even though I was the petitioner, she let Amy talk first. As the petitioner, don't I get to talk first? I asked. As the mediator, I can determine the order of discussion, she shot back, obviously still perturbed by my appearance. Amy was a great actress. She said how much she loved me and wondered why I was suspicious of her. She talked about all the great times that we had had together and cried where appropriate for dramatic effect. She took a good half hour. Either the mediator was touched by Amy's bullshit or was trying to fix the proceedings, because once Amy finished, she turned to me with misty eyes and said, "Mr. Bristol, what would you like to say to your dear wife, who has just bared her soul? She's not a dear wife. She is a serial cheater, has been grossly unfaithful to me, and also is a liar, as clearly evidenced by her story that I beat her. Her entire presentation was an act in an attempt to save $500,000. I don't know if she ever loved me, but I don't care. I don't love her. In fact, I hate her, and I want to get a divorce as quickly as possible so that I can move on with my life." The mediator and Amy were shocked. During the rest of the session, I tersely answered questions or responded to statements from both the mediator and Amy. The only more than 4-word reply I gave during the rest of the session was when tearful Amy said, "You never even gave me a chance to explain about why Reginald was there before you went ballistic. I told you then, in no uncertain terms, to get a vaginal swab to prove that you didn't have sex with him, or to accuse him of sexual assault, and that if you didn't, I was divorcing you. It was your choice. Live with it." That was not well received. As a last desperate gesture, the mediator said, "Mr. Bristol, I want you to stand. Go over to Amy and give her a hug to see if that rekindles any feelings in you." I quickly responded, I didn't see any requirement in the order for me to have to hug her, and the idea of even touching my grossly unfaithful soon-to-be ex-wife makes my skin crawl. Since I don't want to lose my breakfast, I declined. Amy jumped out of her chair, started swearing at me as loudly as she could, and likely would have hit me if the mediator hadn't intervened. As the mediator was trying to calm Amy down, the big grin on my face probably wasn't helping that situation. The mediator said, "You can go, Mr. Bristol." The mediator reported to the court that there was no hope of reconciliation, so the court dissolved the stay and discovery proceeded. During discovery, Amy's attorney took my deposition. I answered all her questions truthfully except for 2. They were, did you ever actually witness Mrs. Bristol having sex with another man before the divorce petition was filed? And did you ever see Reginald Swifton at your house while you were married and before the divorce petition was filed? I'm basically honest, but not stupid. After several months of pretrial proceedings, during which Judge Moore demonstrated his bias whenever possible while still protecting the record for appeal, the trial was set for 2 months after discovery closed. Ron had not taken Amy's deposition for strategic reasons, he told me. However, he did have Amy's response to interrogatories where she swore that she never had sex with another man while married and before the divorce petition was filed. During the trial, we presented our circumstantial case of infidelity by 3 o'clock of the first day. Since we had enough evidence to resist a motion for directed verdict, despite how biased Moore was, he knew that he'd be reversed on appeal if he granted it. It was now the respondent's turn to present her case. Of course, Amy's star witness was Amy herself. Under oath, Amy denied ever having sex with another man while married. At some points, Judge Moore looked a little uncomfortable, but for the most part, he was eating out of her hand and overruled essentially every objection that Ron made. When she finished, it was almost 5 o'clock, so Judge Moore ordered that cross would begin at 9 the next morning. As we were getting our papers together to leave, a guy came up to Ron with a big smile on his face. When Ron saw him, he returned the smile. I had seen the guy sitting in the courtroom during Amy's testimony, but didn't know who he was. "Blake, this is Dan Drake, a friend of mine," Ron said. I shook Drake's hand with a perplexed look on my face. "I have some information for you, Ron," Drake said, his grin even wider. "It relates to impeachment of Amy Bristol's testimony. Let's go to my office and order dinner in," Ron cackled as the 3 of us took off. At Ron's office, Drake showed us one DVD of naked Amy riding James Watkins to orgasm, as he called out her name. Drake said that he had another DVD, but Ron stopped him from showing it to us. "I just want you to testify about the date of your second DVD. If it is what I think it is, but don't know for sure. I don't want to see it now, and I'm sure it will never be shown in court." Promptly at 9 the next morning, Ron started his cross of Amy. After questioning her about Reginald's visit the day that I witnessed him screwing her, he asked, "Do you know a man named James Watkins?" "Yes," she hesitantly replied. "Is his wife Jamie Watkins?" "Yes." "When did you first meet him?" "I don't recall. Exactly. Wasn't it at a party at your father's house 18 months ago when he attended it with his wife, Jamie? Maybe. Hadn't he just moved to town and started working for your father 1 month before that? I guess so. Well, was it or wasn't it? Do we need to call him or Mrs. Jamie Watkins to testify? Ron snarled, his pleasant demeanor suddenly gone. After an uncomfortable pause, Amy stammered out, "Yes, I remember now. That party about 18 months ago was when I first met him. So you never met him before you were married, did you?" "No." Amy hesitantly replied. "Mrs. Bristol, did you ever have sex with Mr. James Watkins?" No. You keep accusing me of cheating," Amy whimpered, then started to cry. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a DVD at the present time. Because of its nature, I ask that it be displayed only on the monitors at counsel's tables, the bench, and the witness stand, not on the main courtroom monitor." "Very well, Mr. Botts. Bailiff, please hit the right buttons to make that happen, will you?" Judge Moore said. After a pause and a nod from the bailiff, Ron pushed the play button on the DVD player. Amy screamed and then covered her mouth with her hands as she saw what appeared on the screen. "Is this video of you and Mr. Watkins having sex, Mrs. Bristol?" Ron asked after it played for about 60 seconds. No, it's a fake." "Turn it off," Amy sobbed. "No further questions, Your Honor. If there's no redirect, I'd like to call Dan Drake to the stand." "No redirect," Amanda McAfee said, wincing as Amy exited the witness stand in tears. "However, I have an objection. This video was never produced to us during discovery and should not be used for any purpose. Actually, Your Honor, I didn't become aware of it until about 7 o'clock last night, but that is irrelevant. The DVD and the testimony of Mr. Dan Drake, who will authenticate it, are being used only to impeach Mrs. Bristol's testimony, not for any other purpose." Judge Moore was uncomfortable but had no choice. "The objection is overruled. If properly authenticated, I'll allow the DVD for the purpose of impeachment only." Dan Drake was a confident and composed witness. After Ron ran him through his qualifications, he authenticated the DVD, explained that he filmed the video at Mr. and Mrs. Watkins' house with his clients, Mrs. Jamie Watkins' permission, and that it was of James Watkins and Amy Bristol having sex while she was married to Blake Bristol and before the divorce petition was filed. Judge Moore now looked extremely uncomfortable, especially when Ron asked Drake, "Do you have another video of Mrs. Bristol having sex with another married man while she was married to Mr. Bristol?" "Yes," Drake excitedly answered. "What is the date of that video, Mr. Drake?" "July 4th, 2012, Drake responded, looking directly at Judge Moore. Judge Moore interrupted. "I need to see lead counsel and the parties in my chambers right now." When we got into chambers, the judge removed his robe, then sat pensively. Finally, he spoke. "Ms. McAfee, your client Mrs. Bristol appears to have committed perjury. I may be obligated to bring this to the D.'s attention and certainly comment on it if I write an opinion. I'm going to recess the trial for 24 hours. I suggest that you work out a settlement during that time." Amy looked down at the floor and Amanda McAfee appeared shell-shocked, but resigned. "If you don't, you won't like what happens next," Moore continued. "Unless someone has a very good reason to present additional evidence, I'm ruling that testimony is closed in this case. I'll also entertain a motion that the record be sealed." By 4 that afternoon, Amy had written me a check for $500,000, plus interest, had paid all of Ron's fees and disbursements, and had signed a document agreeing to the divorce and giving me 60% of our assets. Not the 50% set forth in the prenup. That extra 10% was just my little extra dig. In return, we settled the case with prejudice, promised not to bring Amy's perjury to the DA's attention, and filed a joint order to have the divorce granted for irreconcilable differences and the record sealed. That very afternoon, Judge Moore anxiously approved the settlement, granted the divorce, and sealed the record. When Ron, a few others from his office, Dan Drake, and, surprisingly, Jamie Watkins, and I went out to dinner to celebrate that night, I whispered a question to Ron. Why was Moore so insistent on getting this concluded and the record sealed? "Of course, I have no actual knowledge of this," Ron grinned. "Otherwise, as an officer of the court, I would have had to have filed a motion to recuse Moore and report him to the Ethics Commission. However, I'm betting that he had a personal interest in the matter," Ron said, his grin now having morphed into a truly diabolical one. After thinking a few seconds, I didn't have to ask any follow-up questions. For months later, I read that Judge Matt Moore and his wife Elizabeth Moore had been granted a divorce for irreconcilable differences. The details weren't made public, but I did notice that when around town, Judge Moore was now driving a 5-year-old Ford, whereas when I met him at the 4th of July party in 2012, he had been driving a new Mercedes. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.